What's up, guys? Welcome into another episode of the Wolverine Live Recruiting Show. I am your host, EJ Holland. I will be answering all of your questions tonight, but before I do, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel for free, get notifications every time a new video drops. And again, like this video, it helps us get in front of other Michigan fans. And if you are not a subscriber, you can subscribe to thewolverine.com today. Use the promo code UM1. That's $1 for 2 months over at thewolverine.com. That gets you exclusive insider information on everything Michigan recruiting, the team, transfer portal, and so much more. Plus, you get to be part of a great message board community with thousands and thousands of unique individual users. Plus, we'll even be getting a boost network-wide as On3 is merging with rivals. So take advantage today. Use that promo code UM1. All right, guys. So like I said, we'll be answering the questions in the order in which they came, but you can skip the line by getting a super chat. You are also limited to 4 questions before we ignore you and you have to use a super chat. So Michelle Wallace is in early with a $1.99 super chat. And the question is, the 2027 quarterback, Neil Weiner, we're the early leaders. I don't think that there is a quarterback that Michigan is recruiting named Neil Weiner. I think that is actually I'd have to double check. I think that's actually the coach of Elijah Haven at the Dunham School, which is in Louisiana. And Haven was just on campus for the quarterback academy on Monday. And yeah, it looks like that is correct. So I think Michelle Wallace meant to ask about Elijah Haven, who is ranked as the #1 quarterback in the country in the 2027 class per the industry ranking. Now, Haven is a really interesting prospect. He's a guy that has been ranked really, really high in the rankings, but he has gradually dropped. On3 actually moved him outside of the top 100. So I think he's a prospect, kind of like Brady Smeagol this cycle, was just ranked really high, kind of losing stock, will be a guy that probably falls in the rankings elsewhere. So, with Elijah Haven, I think he's a quality quarterback. I just don't think he's the #1 quarterback in the country. I would say he's, maybe somewhere between, 150 and 250. I mean, it's still really early to be ranking quarterbacks, but that's probably where I would put him early on. In terms of where Michigan stands, they're definitely high on the list. They're high on the list for several quarterbacks. Peter Bork is personally my favorite quarterback on Michigan's recruiting board in terms of realistic lands. I also really like Kavian Bryant. Those would be the top 2 guys for me. And then, next up would be Keegan Croucher. Teddy Gerard had a really good camp at Michigan on Monday. He's someone I need to watch more of. But I think Chip Lindsey's done a fantastic job of getting Michigan in the mix with a lot of these guys early on. I mean, he's really expanding the board and giving himself a lot of options in the 2027 class, which is definitely something that you want to see. You want to get away from the all your eggs in one basket approach that Matt Weiss used to use, that obviously got Michigan in trouble and didn't really work out. So, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I think they're in a good spot with Haven and several other prospects at the quarterback position. All right, let's go ahead and move on to another super chat from Michelle Wallace. And it says, Nick Abrams and Anthony Davis, where do we stand? I just put up an update on the site with Anthony Davis. I was able to catch up with him a little bit, and I think Michigan definitely made a move. They're in his top 3, which he said on the record, but he's going to Alabama this weekend. Ole Miss really built up a lot of momentum last weekend. So I think it's going to be pretty tough to lure Anthony Davis away from the South. I think they have a better shot with Nick Abrams. Michigan did a really fantastic job on its recent official visit. He really values what Michigan can offer from an academic standpoint. He goes to a high academic school in Maryland. His father is the CEO of a financial planning consulting firm. So the family was very, very impressed with the Ross School of Business on their official visit. And Abrams just seems like a Michigan type of kid. I think he's kind of has that personality. He would fit the culture really, really well. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I think Michigan has a good, very, very good shot at landing. I mean, if I had to put in a prediction today, I would probably side with Michigan. But Oregon, Alabama, Georgia, those are the other finalists, and they're still very much in it as well. We have another 199 super chat. This one comes from Sean O'Hara, and he says, what are our chances with Carter Meadows? I still think they're really good. I mean, from talking to Carter and his family, I mean, they also seem like Michigan fits, much like Nick Abrams. I think their family, the Meadows family, is just very well educated, very well rounded. If you talk to Carter's parents, they're more academics than they are football fans. They really value what Michigan has to offer from a university standpoint. And I've always said that Carter Meadows can be in the same mold of Andrew Babalola in terms of a guy who, you probably have to put together some type of strong NIL package, but that's not going to be the end all be all in that recruitment. It's really going to come down to academics, culture, fit. And that's why I think Carter Meadows, if I had to put in a pick today, I'd probably side with Michigan. Now, other schools have really been making runs here. Penn State has been a long-standing school. South Carolina, Ohio State, all those schools have been involved. But when you look at Michigan as a university, it's definitely superior. The education that Michigan can offer is much better than the other finalists. And I think that will really weigh with the Meadows family, especially Carter's parents. So, and then on top of that, you add that Michigan develops pass rushers better than anybody, right? They've had several taken high in the NFL draft, and that's certainly appealing on the football side to Carter. So he's coming in this weekend. I think if Michigan, knocks it out of the park, they'll have a real shot at landing him. All right, let's go back to the top. Remember, the questions are answered in the order in which they came. And if you want to skip the line, you can leave a super chat. Okay, Zachary Pizzot says, are we out of it for Trenton Henderson? If so, what are best options at edge besides Carter Meadows? Michigan's still in it with Trenton Henderson. I'm just not really super optimistic there. Florida and LSU continue to be schools that have a lot of buzz. Texas has been making a run here as of late. So, I just think it's going to be really tough to pull him out of the South. And, I think they're really invested in getting Carter Meadows. They already have 2 edge commits. So if you were to ask me today, I would probably put in a prediction elsewhere for Henderson in terms of other options. Again, I mean, Carter Meadows is the guy on that board, obviously. You already have 2 edges committed in Tariq Boney and Mikhail Blade. I think with Mikhail Blade potentially, sliding in and being more of a guy that could play like a Chris Jenkins role, that gives you the flexibility to take another edge outside of Meadows. So I think that Jackson Ford Samuels is definitely one to watch out of Pennsylvania. I think it's Michigan and Penn State there, and Jackson's coming in this weekend. I also think you have Julian Walker out of South Carolina. He's a heavy South Carolina lean, but he hasn't committed there yet. So, Michigan's going to try to shoot its best shot this weekend. All right, Zachary Pizzot says, Felix Ojo saying his decision is coming sooner rather than later, and then is visiting Utah. What's your read in that recruitment? Yeah, the Utah visit was pretty funny, but hey, I mean, Ojo's been to a lot of places. Like, I think this would be his 8th official visit. He started early and I think he started with Colorado and Ole Miss, and then just started working his way around. I still think Texas is the team to beat in this recruitment. Others like Michigan, Ohio State, Florida, I think are legitimate contenders, but I would still give Texas the edge here, unless, Michigan really puts together, a crazy package. But there are other guys on the board that they really like too, like John Turntine, who was in this weekend, and Kelvin Obot, who's coming in this coming weekend for Victor's weekend. So I just, I think Michigan gave it a really good shot with Ojo. I'm just not sure they're going to win him over, but, we'll see. I mean, Michigan can't be ruled out for a really highly touted offensive lineman. Zachary Pizzo says, Savion's agent was tweeting like crazy this weekend. Have you heard good things? Well, now is a perfect time to subscribe to the Wolverine.com and use that promo code UM1. That's $1 for 2 months, because you can use that code, sign up, and read my exclusive interview with Savion Hyder's advisor, Adam McCann, and that's over at the Wolverine.com. And yes, he had a lot of great things to say about Michigan, about the official visit, how things went with Sherrone Moore, Tony Alford, Sean McGee. They, as he said, they rolled out the blue carpet. So, I still think Michigan and Tennessee are the two schools at the top for Savion Hyder. I don't think that's really going to change. Obviously, Michigan got its shot this weekend. Tennessee gets his shot this coming weekend, so they get him in last. But I think with, Hyder, he's not going to make a quick, rash decision after OVs. I think he's a guy who wants to take his time and make a decision a little later. So, several weeks, a month from the end of official visits, maybe even a little bit longer. He really wants to take his time and figure this out, as opposed to just jumping in the boat right after an official visit. So we'll see how things go at Tennessee this weekend and how things continue to progress over the next several weeks. Zachary Pizzo says, realistic chances at hitting on Deuce Gerald and Calvin Russell. I would say pretty low. I think Deuce Gerald is going to be a really tough land out of Georgia. Obviously, he's making a midweek official visit, so Michigan is hanging around there. And, Lou Esposito obviously has done a great job on the recruiting trail, but I would think he's probably stays south. I think LSU's built up a lot of momentum there. Calvin Russell, obviously a very interesting one. He's been to Michigan in the past. I think that one would have to be pretty NIL heavy. Especially with Oregon involved, LSU, Miami, I think that one's going to be a tough pool. I think they have a much better chance at Travis Johnson, but the fact that he's coming in for this final official visit weekend, I think gives at least some type of chance or some type of small optimism that Michigan can find a way to get this done. But I think it's really going to revolve around three components. One is the NIL piece. Two is really getting him around Bryce Underwood, and three is really selling him on the offense and the fact that it is going to be more balanced, that they are going to throw the ball a lot more with Bryce Underwood. All right, Michelle Wallace says, what's the word on Travis Johnson? I feel good about Travis coming out of his official visit. This week will be kind of interesting. He has an official visit scheduled to Virginia Tech. Georgia's trying to get him in on campus for an OV. He was previously scheduled to make an OV there. It didn't end up happening, so they're trying to make that work. But at the end of the day, I think Michigan did everything it could this weekend, and I felt good enough to put in a prediction, and you've seen others come in as well. Steve Wiltfong came in with a prediction. Chad Simmons came in with a prediction as well. So I think Michigan is very much trending in the right direction for Travis Johnson coming out of his OV. Michelle Wallace says, do we still have the lead for Ben Boulware? Yeah, I mean, it really just depends on if Michigan pushes there. I think, they answered a lot of his questions on the OV. I think Michigan's the clear team to beat for Boulware. Again, just really depends on if Michigan goes all in. Boulware is such a weird recruitment just because there aren't a lot of other players involved. South Carolina was a school that was thought to be a factor for Boulware, but there hasn't been a ton of communication there. He's supposed to take an official to USC this weekend, but it doesn't seem like the Trojans are pushing or at least making him a priority. So the door is open for Michigan to win this recruitment, but I think that, it really comes down to, do they want to win the recruitment? Do they want to push right now? Michelle Wallace back with another one. It's Andre Clark. And he says, and by the way, Clark has an E at the end of it. I've seen a lot of people misspelling it. So it is Andre Clark with an E. And he says it states we're trending for him. Yes, I put in a prediction for Andre coming out of his official visit. And you've had others follow in this one as well. Steve Wilfong and Chad Simmons both joined me afterwards and put in predictions for Michigan. I have a great relationship with Andre. I've known him over the last year. I've had many conversations with his father as well. I was on the phone with them on Sunday, and I just think Michigan did everything right this weekend. You know, SMU, Kentucky are two other schools that are pushing, Virginia Tech, the home state school. But, you know, with Andre setting his decision shortly after the Michigan OV, I think that speaks volumes. I think, you know, again, the Wolverines, you know, crushed the official visit weekend. Noah says, do you ever find it covering Michigan recruiting? Do you ever find it hard covering Michigan recruiting while not living in Michigan? I get this question often, and the answer is definitely no, especially like this cycle. When you look at, you know, I live in Norfolk, so obviously I'm right down the road from Travis Johnson. I'm only an hour and a half away from big targets like Markel Dabney and Andre Clark. You know, I'm a couple hours away from Savon. I'm 3 hours away from Carter Meadows. So, you know, a lot of the big time prospects this cycle are really close to me. So it's been great to be able to just go out and see them whenever I want. I mean, how many times have I seen Travis? How many times have I seen Andre? How many times have I seen Carter? Like a ton. Savon, you know, I've seen all those guys multiples of times. So I think that it's been easier this cycle. When you look at the state of Michigan, you know, if I were living in the state of Michigan, who would I be covering? You know, like there's nobody there really after this cycle in the state other than CJ Sadler. There's nobody there really in it, you know, in Ohio. There's nobody there really in it, even in Chicagoland outside of Laney McHale Blade. So I think my job's definitely been easier living on the East Coast this cycle. Michelle Wallace says, and this is Michelle Wallace's last regular question, and it's what's up with the safety Chase, and that would be Chase Calicut. Chase was very candid in our interview, which you can read over at thewolverine.com. His top two are Michigan and Texas. Georgia still lingering around. I think it really comes down to his Texas official visit this weekend and whether or not he wants to stay home or, you know, broaden his horizons and leave. I think Michigan did a great job this weekend getting him to spend a lot of time with Andrew Marsh, who is also from the Houston area. Marsh served as Calicut's player host, and I think, you know, that really helped out a lot. But I think coming out of the visit, Texas is probably still the team to beat unless he goes on his OV this weekend and just doesn't really feel it and he wants to, you know, leave home. But I think that one's going to be a bit tough to win. A new super chat from Michelle Wallace. Do you think NIL is ruining college sports? I don't really know if I have an opinion on college sports in general. You know, I think everybody that watches regularly knows that I'm not like a big sports guy. I'm just a recruiting guy. You know, I love the recruiting process, the evaluation process, the high school football side of things. You know, in terms of NIL and recruiting, I think it was certainly more fun to cover recruiting when you had, you know, JJ and Donovan and Junior and Will and even my first cycle on the Michigan beat, I got half a cycle, but, you know, Zach Zinter and Kalel and Blake and, you know, all those guys, so fantastic to cover. And you didn't have to ever worry about ruining a recruitment or something leaking about numbers or, you know, any of that nonsense. Like I always think to myself, how would it have been different covering Donovan? How would it have been different covering Junior? How would it have been different covering JJ? Like those recruitments and the relationships I built with them were so genuine. And I feel like it's really tough to get that in that era. So is it ruining recruiting? Yeah, for me it is, you know, like it's not the same. Like you don't have those genuine relationships anymore. You have to walk on eggshells. Everybody gets upset about NIL. Everybody gets upset about if you think, you know, their kid's not a 5-star or 4-star. You know, there's so many things that upset people. It's so sensitive these days. Like the last great team was the Michigan team that won the national championship. It just was, all those kids were so great to cover. Nixes says, why is Savion's family unhappy with his NIL numbers being leaked, and will this affect his recruitment? I don't think that it will affect his recruitment. Reporting on NIL is just part of recruiting now. Like I said, we don't have the good old days of covering JJ and Donovan anymore. We just don't. Like, those days are long gone. Like, NIL is at the forefront of everybody's mind. Everybody knows these recruitments require NIL. Now, I don't think that reporting exact numbers, unless, even Bryce Underwood, for example, right? Everybody was upset that I reported on Bryce's NIL last cycle, but the numbers were already out there. So I was just trying to give you a more accurate number. Like, the first report, I think, came from CBS, which actually owns 24/7. But I don't think I've ever been first to put out an actual number. I do tell you guys if I think NIL is a factor in a recruitment, or if Michigan has to do more with NIL, etc. But I just think putting out the exact numbers, more than a month away from a scheduled decision, I think kind of hampers negotiations. Probably it maybe casts Savon in a bad light, because I think that there's still a lot of negative stigma that comes with getting a big NIL package. And whether it's Bryce or Savon or Calvin Russell or Jackson Cantwell or whoever the case may be, if you're a 5-star level recruit, you're probably getting a big NIL package, and that's okay. That doesn't make you a bad person. You're just doing what's best for you and your family, right? So, I think it's a kind of a fine line to walk. Like, yeah, these kids are basically professionals, are getting paid, but at the same time, I think reporting on exact numbers is kind of risky business, just because, they are still recruits and they are still high school prospects, but, it's just a weird time that we're kind of living in. So, I think there are a lot of reasons, and, hopefully the On3's national report with Savion's number doesn't, directly impact, all the years that I've spent building a relationship with Savon and everybody around him. We do have a super chat, and it's Coach Curry. He says, what's the latest on CJ Sadler? I heard we're no longer recruiting him. There's just moving parts there. I don't want to get too much into it. I mean, Michigan's still in contact. Obviously, he hasn't scheduled an official visit. There's only one more official visit weekend coming up, so I don't know, man. I think it's just a situation that still has some things that need to be sorted. Let's go down to customer service. Who did we move the needle with this past weekend? Based on the high-low scale, what are ours with the OVs this past week? In terms of who they moved the needle with, I think they really did move the needle with Andre Clark and Travis Johnson. Obviously, I put in predictions for both of those prospects out of Virginia. I feel very optimistic about Michigan with both of those guys. In terms of prospects I haven't put in predictions for, I think they're in a really good spot to flip Markel Dabney away from SMU. I think they are in a good spot with Ben Boulware if they push. I think that they're in a good spot with Kenneth Goodwin, but that one, I'm not sure if they're going to push there either. So, we'll see. I think they're also in a really good spot with Jordan Deck. I haven't put in a prediction there because I want to see how his Baylor official visit goes this weekend, but I could, easily see him in the class. I think they did a sneaky good job with a guy, like nobody's talking about this guy, but if you go read my story with his father today, Salisi Moa, I think Michigan actually established itself as a true contender in that race. So, those are, some of the guys from the weekend that I feel good about. Nixes says, do you think we will land Kelvin Obot? It's definitely possible. I mean, they put in a lot of work into that recruitment. He's kind of a mysterious guy, doesn't do a ton of interviews. He's hidden out in Idaho. I think that, Michigan's right up there with Oregon. And, I think it's tough to beat out an Idaho kid I think it's tough to beat out Oregon for an Idaho kid. I mean, you saw Gatlin Bear pick Oregon over Michigan. You saw Kenyon Sadiq a couple of cycles ago pick Oregon over Michigan. Of course, Michigan went into Idaho and landed Colston Loveland, so that's a great selling point to Obot. But yeah, I mean, I think it's I wouldn't say Michigan leads, but they're right up there with Oregon for sure. Nix's, is this the fourth question for Nix's? No, this is only the third. Okay. What do you believe our chances? I'm trying to short you there. My bad. What do you believe our chances are with Calvin Russell and us having his last OV? Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think there's three parts that Michigan needs to really, hit home with. That's NIL, playing with Bryce Underwood, the offense actually opening up under Chip Lindsey. But, I think it's going to be tough to win over Calvin Russell. Like I said, they have a much better shot with Travis Johnson. Miami, he's a legacy there. LSU's produced a ton of, NFL wide receiver talent. Oregon obviously has a ton of NIL and, an offense that is known historically for passing the ball. So I think it's going to be tough. But the fact that Michigan gets the last OV means they're in it. Nix's last question says, what do you think of the 3-star linebacker recruit that is committed to SMU who is on campus? Markel Dabney, who is back on campus. He, I think, is a very athletic, versatile linebacker who's built really, really well. I mean, this dude's built like a tank. He plays running back for his high school team. He also plays some safety, but I think he is a guy that will continue to bulk up and be a really athletic Mike. I saw someone on our message board kind of compare him to Mike Barrett. And I don't dislike that comp. I did not cover Barrett as a recruit. That was before my time, but obviously I got to see some Michigan games, and I think Dabney has kind of a similar skill set as Barrett. I do think that's a good comp. Sorry to the message board poster. I'm not recalling who it was that compared him to Barrett, but I think he has a lot of those same values. And, I think that Dabney is definitely an upside prospect. And if you can pair him with a guy like Nick Abrams, I think that's, a quality duo. Plus they have a spot open for another backer. Customer service back again says, what are our chances with John Turntine, Kelvin Obot, and Malachi Lee and Felix Ojo? With Turntine, I still think it's Michigan, Texas. I'm supposed to talk to his dad tonight, so I should have more there. With Obot, like I said, I think it's Michigan, Oregon. I would probably lean Oregon, but again, Michigan is right up there. Malachi Lee, I think Michigan can win out here, but it really comes down to the OV this weekend, as several SEC schools are pushing. And then Felix Ojo, I would favor Texas. Customer service says, do we have a real chance with Calvin Russell? Obviously, we already answered that. Customer service says, do you still need a Switch 2 regular or Mario Kart bundle? I don't really care if it has Mario Kart, to be honest. I still haven't had a chance to get one. They continue to be sold out. So if you can DM me and not rip me off, I will talk business. Ryan says, Hyder's agent has had some extreme pro Michigan vibes and not a word of the other schools. Good sign. Also, the NACO's NIL number that we're offering, does this now give Tennessee the bar that they need to clear? I think the NIL number that NACO's put out isn't an exact number from Michigan. So I think that, again, like I said earlier, and I don't want to comment too much since, it doesn't seem like the Hyder family is very enthused about On3's reporting. This is one where he's going to take his OV to Tennessee. And then, the business part will get sorted out in the weeks after that. Like I said, Savion's not making a decision right after the OVs. So I think that this one's kind of more of a long game. I think it is a good sign that Michigan's built a great relationship with Adam McCann. Sean McGee has always been a guy that's impressed them. Tony Alford has known him for multiple years. Obviously, he was on campus with Savon this weekend, and things went extremely well. So, again, this remains a Michigan-Tennessee battle, and I think we still have, it doesn't seem like a long time because he is going to make a decision before the end of summer, but in the recruiting world where things move so fast, we still have a long time in the Hyder recruitment. G. Boulder says, what offensive lineman do you think we get? I could see them definitely landing Malachi Lee and fending off those SEC schools. I could see them beating out Penn State for Marky Walbridge. I feel like he's kind of the forgotten guy on the offensive line board. Obviously, they already have, a commitment from Bear McCorder. I think that, it was tough, obviously, losing on Carter Scruggs and guys like that. But this weekend, obviously, very, very big for offensive line recruiting. And, I think that Michigan has done everything right in the Malachi Lee recruitment. I think that they've built such a long-standing relationship with Marky Walbridge. Those are guys I could see. And I still think they're a dark horse for John Turntine too. Everybody's still pointing to Texas, but if you're Texas and you have to put together a strong NIL package for Felix Ojo, are you going to put together a big one for John Turntine as well? I think that could open the door for Michigan. And on top of that, and like I mentioned many times, Turntine's a Michigan fit, man. This is a kid who's also considering Stanford. He's top 10 in his class as a student. They value Michigan's academics and life after football. They value the offensive line development. So Michigan's certainly an appealing option away from just the business side. G Boulder says, how many wide receivers do you think we're taking? I have been told 3. So that would include Jalen Pyle, who's already committed. That means there's 2 spots if I had to put my best guess in, one would be Travis Johnson, and I think they can win over Zion Robinson. Texas Tech remains a player there. Miami is a player there, but I think Michigan's still in a good spot with Zion too. Zachary Pizzo says, Hayes dropped a commit watch post. Could it be Savon? It could be a number of guys. It could be multiples of guys. Obviously, like I said, they had really good momentum coming out of this weekend with Travis Johnson and Andre Clark. They have great momentum with Markel Dabney. I don't think it's Savon just because Savion's taking his time. And like I said, I don't think it's maybe any one guy. It could be multiples of guys. All right, so we have reached the 30-minute mark. Before we start our rapid fire, this show is presented by our sponsor, My Perfect Franchise. Are you a displaced corporate executive, or are you wanting to put your career into your own hands? Are you an entrepreneur wanting to diversify? Andy Luedecke can help. Andy is a huge college sports fan and franchise veteran, having owned multiple franchises and businesses. Using his expertise, he helps others find their American dream. Call Andy today. Put your life and career in your own hands. Best of all, his services are 100% free to use. So what do you have to lose? You can call Andy at 404-973-9901 or email him at andy@myperfectfranchise.net. All right, let's do some rapid fire. Last call for super chats as well. Also, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for free. Why is On3 ruining recruitments? Again, I don't think On3, is being malicious in the way they're reporting. NIL is part of today's game, and it's going to upset some folks, and that sucks from a relationship building standpoint. When you look at Savon in particular, obviously I've invested a lot of resources in covering that recruitment. So, it kind of sucks that they're upset about the On3 report, which again, I had nothing to do with. I don't know why people are lumping me in with that. I had nothing to do with that report. I did not contribute to that report. I did not give out any type of number. But again, I don't think On3 is trying to ruin a recruitment. It's more so, Nakos is an NIL insider. He has a job to do. Tyson Smith says, will we get Salisi Moa? Like I said earlier, I think Michigan has become a real dark horse in that recruitment. His father went to Utah. It's obviously the home state school. Washington has offered him the opportunity to play both ways. I think both of those schools have built up a lot of buzz, but I think Michigan did as well as it could have with Moa this weekend. Tyson Smith says, who do you like more, Brady Smeagol or Keegan Croucher? I would definitely give the nod to Keegan Croucher. I think Croucher has more ceiling, more athleticism. So, yeah, I'd go with Croucher. Ryan Scalzo says, who is committing soon? Andre Clark set his decision date here. He'll be committing before the end of the month. Kari Adams will be making a decision before the end of the month. Chase Calicut will be making a decision before the end of the month. So, Travis Johnson tentatively scheduled for July 4th, but could move it up a little bit that same week. They're looking for a venue to do an announcement, so July 4th might not work. So the week of June 30th, I think, any of those days could be Travis. So, those are some guys with upcoming decisions. Jordan Deck, July 5th, Donovan Webb is sometime early July. I don't want to misspeak on the date, but, all those guys have upcoming decisions. Matty S says, any word on the CJ Sadler recruitment? I hear not to expect him in the class. Yeah, I've been kind of I've left him out of my mock class going into official visits. I think that one has some moving parts that need to be sorted. Ethan Bryce says, what is the Hayes post about? I mean, like I said, it could be multiple guys. I mean, Michigan's trending in the right direction after this OV weekend. ButterXO says, project what the wide receiver class will be like now that there seems to be more clarity on where Michigan stands with its top targets. Like I said, they're looking to take 3, so it would be Jalen Pyle, Travis Johnson, and Zion Robinson. If they can't get Zion, we'll see where they go. They're still trying with Jaquaden Guilford, former Penn State commit. I'm sure they'll continue to contact Brady Marchese, who's committed to Georgia, so we'll see. Gary Gaines says, it seems like there are a lot of our targets are lower ranked players compared to Texas, Alabama. I think that meant to say Ohio State. Why don't we look for all the top 100 players as close to it as possible? Michigan is recruiting a lot of high-level players. You look at guys like Savon Hyder, he's a 5-star. Felix Ojo is a 5-star. Kelvin Obot is a top 10 player in the country per on 3. John Turntine's a top 50 kid. Calvin Russell is a top 50 kid. Those are guys that just come to mind right off the bat. Salisi Moa is a top 50 kid. So I think Michigan kind of struggled earlier in the cycle when it wasn't talking numbers. And now that that's changed, I think you can see Michigan land some more high profile recruits. Ethan Bryce also asked about the Hayes Fawcett post. We already addressed that. Dave's here says, are players talking about opting out of profit sharing for NIL? As far as revenue sharing, I haven't heard that any recruits are looking to opt out. Ayush Unadkat says, how do you feel about Kari Adams at this point? I don't have a good feel for Kari. And obviously I've covered Kari a lot and talked about him a lot and have gone out to see him a couple of times. But I think Kari is a guy, I told my coworker, Ethan McDowell, he's a guy that could really end up anywhere. I think Notre Dame has all this confidence and he could certainly end up there. But I wouldn't be surprised if Kari just goes to Penn State, or I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at Michigan. He's a guy who, kind of a little bit of a mysterious type of vibe there with Kari. He's very quiet. He doesn't like to talk a lot about the process. So we'll see. I think Notre Dame did a great job this weekend. I think Michigan and Penn State have done great jobs as well. Oregon is still lingering there too. So it'll be interesting to see where Kari ends up. We have a new super chat. Need Pecos says, have you heard about 2027 prospect Jack Me Off? No, Need Pecos, and I would assume that's just a Notre Dame fan trolling, but we're glad to take your $2. Customer service says, why does Sloppy Sam wait for you to put in a prediction before he copies you? I don't know, man. Ask him. Nick Brasio says, what are your thoughts on the cryptic Michigan Hayes tweet? Like I said, could be multiple commitments. You haven't seen Sherrone more eyes yet, but I think you can expect some eyes. I think you can expect some eyes from Sherrone probably before the end of the week. Natushi 4675 says, have you heard of any new info out of North Dakota? Not on that particular prospect. More Notre Dame fans in the chat box. Have you heard of any? It's the same question. Sorry. Jaquaden Guilford to Ole Miss or Indiana? I think he might end up at Ohio State. Span Markiola says Hyder's tape reminded me of Donovan Edwards, but more hit. His pass catching looked good. Yeah, he's a great pass catcher. I think he's probably a better between the tackles runner than Donovan was. On threes comparison for Savon is Bijan Robinson, who I actually covered on the Texas beat. And the more I thought about it, More I like that comp. Ethan Bryce says, do you like any Michigan commits right now? Do you think any Michigan commits right now are leaning towards flipping? If so, who and to where? The one we're obviously tracking is Brody Jennings. He could flip to Miami or to Florida. I think it's going to be tough to keep him. Let's see. We got Neat Pecos. When does Hyder commit? Later on. Like I said, probably, weeks after his OVs. Cam says, who does Michigan have the best chance with on the next official visit? So this official visit weekend has a lot of big name guys coming in. I think, obviously they have a great shot to pull one of, maybe even both, if everything goes right, of Malachi Lee and Kelvin Obot. I think that they have a great shot with Carter Meadows. Obviously, they're right up there with Texas for Zayden Krempin, but I think the Longhorns will be tough to beat. They're fighting for Dorian Barney. Penn State got some predictions, but he didn't commit there. So I think that one could be in Michigan's way, go in Michigan's way. It seems like leaders change a lot for Dorian Barney, and a guy that nobody's really talking about a lot is Chase Jeter from Virginia. He's a lower ranked corner, 3-star prospect, but a guy that Michigan really likes. We have a $10 super chat from Wolverine Casual. So shout out to Wolverine Casual. Are you concerned at all that the Hyder camp blames Michigan for the NIL leak? Do you think this hurts Michigan's recruitment? What odds do you give us? Tennessee, Georgia, and Ohio State. I don't think they blame Michigan. I think, his advisor, Adam McCann, has a really good relationship with Sean McGee. So I think he trusts McGee. And Michigan's not a school that really leaks anything. It's kind of like Fort Knox. Like, it's tough to get information out of Michigan. Do you think it hurts Michigan's recruitment? I don't think it really hurts Michigan's recruitment. Again, I don't think that they're going to blame Michigan. Like, it's not great that it comes out a couple of days after the Michigan visit in terms of optics, but I don't think that they're going to blame Michigan. I think their anger will probably be directed elsewhere and probably at On3, unfortunately. In terms of what odds would you give us, Tennessee, Georgia, and Ohio State? I think very low odds for Georgia and Ohio State. I think Michigan and Tennessee are, right up there. I don't really know if I can give a percentage. I think I would probably give a slight lead to Michigan, maybe, but it really depends on the OV to Tennessee this weekend and the discussions that happen in the weeks following. But I think it's also important for recruits to realize that, or fans to realize that, recruits aren't making decisions based off of reports. Recruits can get upset all they want about NIL reports or evaluation reports or things of that nature. I don't think it really impacts the decision. Even with me, people were angry that I ruined the Bryce Underwood recruitment because I reported an NIL number after CBS Sports. Somehow that made sense. But Bryce obviously ended up at Michigan. Or there was a time people were upset that I put in a flip pick for Jordan Young, even though his visit was public when he was committed to Clemson. And you know what? Jordan Young ended up in Michigan. Jaden Davis, I said I didn't think he was very good, and he still ended up in Michigan. Gary Oaks says, thoughts on Michigan's chances with Dorian Barney? Like I said, Penn State's been the school that's been trending a lot, but didn't commit there after his OV. He was once considered a Texas A&M lean. Anything can happen this weekend. Nick Brasio says, what's your prediction for Bryce stat-wise in year one? I think that's probably a better question for our team guys, but I think he definitely does better than any of the quarterbacks from last year. You don't know says recruiting is still frustrating. They had better land a minimum, a top 10 class. Anything outside of the top 10, I think, would be pretty disappointing after last cycle's finish. Trevor Goring says, when are you going to reveal the secret visitor? We already did. It was SMU linebacker commit Markel Dabney. Feel pretty good about Michigan potentially flipping him. And last question comes from Ethan Bryce. says Brody Jennings has been committed for so long. I feel that when recruits commit early, the process they usually flip by the end of it. Do you feel the same? If they are so in, why commit then change? Sometimes circumstances change. When you look at Brody Jennings, he just had a major death in the family, so it would make sense for him to stay closer to home. I think, this is not regarding Brody because, like I said, Brody just had a major death. But in general, I think, NIL can change a lot of things. That causes a lot of flips. Sometimes recruits get caught up in the moment early on when they're underclassmen, and then they miss taking visits and being part of the recruiting process and things of that nature. So a lot of different factors. But that's our show today, guys. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, I am innocent. I have nothing to do with the Savon Hyder report and the NIL situation. That was not me. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the Wolverine.com. Use that promo code UM1 for all of the insider information, all our great interviews, whether it was with Savon Hyder's advisor or Chase Calicut's mother or Salisi Moa's father. We had a lot of great, or the recruits themselves. We had a lot of great content over at thewolverine.com. So don't miss out. And I will see you guys next week.